In this session, we close our study of the historical books in Babylon by looking at the Israelites' return from exile. To understand the return of the Israelites, we need to be aware of the history not addressed in the Bible. The Babylonian Empire, who forced the Israelites into exile, was overthrown by the Persian Empire. The Persians approached things a little differently. They helped many people, not just the Israelites, return to their land from exile. The Persians weren't just being nice, but they believed that helping the Israelites return and rebuild their towns would discourage revolt and encourage public approval. The Persians declared that Jews could return to Jerusalem 70 years after they went into captivity. It was the remaining people of the southern kingdom, or Judah, who returned. The northern kingdom, or Israel, was taken away by the Assyrians and never returned. When the southern kingdom returned from exile, they did not return in one large group, but in several groups over several years. The Jews started to spread outside of the land of Israel, while a number of Jews stayed in Babylon and other areas. They would soon find themselves throughout the Mediterranean. In the Hebrew Scriptures, the books of Ezra and Nehemiah are not two separate books, or even one book like Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles. Instead, there's something in between. They're usually grouped together under the title Ezra and Nehemiah. After your reading, you can see why. There is great similarity between the two books. Both of them focus on the leadership of one individual. Both of them focus on restoring some aspect of the destroyed nation. And both books show how the people encounter similar opposition and are ultimately successful. As you explored the book of Ezra, you saw the king support the efforts of the Israelites to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. Remember that the temple was the center point of worship for Old Testament Jews. The destruction of the temple was a very important event, so of course, Ezra and the Israelites received opposition. Some accused the Israelites of potential treason and even wrote letters to the king of Persia to get the building of the temples stopped. Why would they oppose the construction of the temple? The opponents viewed the reestablishment of the temple, the successful return of the Israelites, as a threat to their power. You see, the land of Israel was not left empty after the Israelites had been forced into exile. Other people moved in, and the surrounding communities grew. They didn't want the Israelites to return or their temple to be rebuilt. Your final reading from the book of Ezra recorded the completion of the temple's foundation. While this passage simply records the completion of the project, you can imagine the joy and pride that followed. This was a project that required the involvement of the entire community, encountered serious opposition, and took several years, yet it was successfully accomplished. The Israelites slowly began rebuilding from the consequences of their sin and exile. The book of Nehemiah reads much like the book of Ezra and reminds us of the book of Daniel. Nehemiah holds an important position in the court of the king of Persia. As cupbearer, he was a trusted advisor who stood between the king and assassination attempts. He tasted or drank whatever the king was served to make sure it was not poisonous. Yet while he served the king of Persia faithfully, his heart was with his people in Jerusalem. Do you remember the great sorrow that consumed him when he heard about the state of Jerusalem? With prayer and with the support of the king of Persia, he was able to return to Jerusalem to oversee the construction of the walls. Like Ezra, Nehemiah and the Israelites encountered opposition. People of Jerusalem did not want the walls rebuilt. Understand that the city walls were more than just a defensive feature. They were a symbol of a town's status. To have a city wall meant the town was important. We might compare this to a modern city having a professional sports team, which is a source of pride and sets a city apart from surrounding ones. Allowing Jerusalem to rebuild its walls not only meant that the people would be free from their opponents' threats, but signified the return of this important city. With this, we close our study of the historical books of the Old Testament. Now please take a moment to explore the relational questions from this session.